there, and welcome to the channel. What is the best power modification you can make to your big block Chevy? Of course, I'm talking about power adders. You know, nitrous, blower, and turbos. In this video, we're going to take a look at test run on big block Chevys with power adders, starting out with nitrous oxide. In fact, we got two tests run on nitrous oxide. The first one run on a Junkyard 454 Gen 6. Then we run it on a more powerful modified 496 combination to show you that nitrous does what nitrous does regardless of the combination. We follow that up with Boost, a 671 Supercharger on a 540-inch blueprint engine crate motor, a power adder crate motor. So, you know, we're going to add power to that. And we're going to finish things off with a pair of cheap eBay twin turbos on a 454. So we're going to go through these power adders fairly quickly. On the big block setup, we ran a Junkyard Gen 6 454. This one was a 1999. I like the Gen 6 stuff because it has a hydraulic roller cam. It has the good head, small chambers, a little more compression than the peanut port stuff. The way that we run them normally when we get them from the wrecking yard, we take the factory fuel injection off. You could use the factory fuel injection, but we replaced it with a simple dual plane intake. In this case, an RPM air gap. We ran a 750 Holley, an MSD distributor, and long tube headers that we always run on the dyno. Otherwise, the motor was stock inside. We didn't change the springs or the camshaft or anything, and run in this manner with the dual plane intake manifold on our Gen 6 454. It made 376 horsepower and 481 foot-pounds of torque. But the way to transform this thing into a serious street performer, I'm meaning something that makes over 500 horsepower, was to add a simple nitrous kit to this thing. We added an inexpensive Holley Sniper nitrous kit, which is still adjustable up to the limit, the flow limit basically, of the small solenoids that they use on there. But we ran a 62 nitrous jet, a 53 fuel jet. We had about 5.5 pounds of fuel pressure going to the fuel side of the nitrous kit because it ran independent of the fuel supply to the carburetor, and run with our nitrous activation and with the right tune, as you can see here, nice smooth curve. This thing made 529 horsepower and 662 foot-pounds of torque. So over 500 horsepower and over 650 foot-pounds, and we activated this thing down at about 36 or 3700 RPM. Obviously, good things are going to happen. Now, if you got a Fox chassis Mustang with this simple Junkyard big block and this very inexpensive nitrous kit, obviously good things would happen here. I mean, making over 500 horsepower and over 650 foot-pounds, on the nitrous, you could even activate that earlier to get even more torque. But obviously, this all of a sudden, this Junkyard motor with a nitrous kit, it would be a real player out on the street. To illustrate that nitrous doesn't just work on a Junkyard motor. In fact, it works on any combination. Whatever the NA power output is, that's your starting point, and then you add nitrous to that. So it doesn't really matter what cylinder head you have or what camshaft you have. Just think about the motor that you're building as making NA power, and then you adding how much ever nitrous you're going to add to that. So I'm going to illustrate that on this 496. So this was a Stroker 496 big block Chevy. It had good stuff in it. It had CP Carrillo rods and pistons. It had a Scat stroker crank, the 425 stroker crank. It had the Comp BR300-14 camshaft, a solid roller, but relatively mild for a solid roller. Is designed as a blower cam, but as you'll see, it works very well as a nitrous cam as well. I'll go ahead and put the specs up here. We had roller rockers on it. We had a set of ProMax CNC ported heads and a Mylodon pan with a windage tray and stuff in it. We ran an Edelbrock Super Victor intake manifold and the 1050 Dominator. And this thing made pretty good power for a 496. It was only 10.5 to 1. It made 677 horsepower and 589 or 90 foot-pounds of torque. So it did very well. Here's what happened after we added our nitrous to it. This was a Zex perimeter plate and was 150 shot, and the peak, as you can see, we added this, we engaged it fairly late. We just kind of want to show you what's going on with nitrous and how well it helps. But you can see the curves mirrored each other, meaning that we got the tune right on the Zex. Run with the nitrous, the power output jumped to 859 horsepower. Peak torque was 769. Again, if you engage this earlier, anywhere before 52, you're going to add more torque than horsepower. So if you add a consistent horsepower amount, the torque is going to go way up. So you can make obviously good power when you're starting with a healthy motor and you add nitrous to it. If you're adding, as we showed earlier, a stock motor and you're adding nitrous to it, nitrous always works no matter what you put it on. Jumping into the big blocks even further, with power adders, we're going to take a look at a supercharger and what would be better on a big block than a big root supercharger, and that's what we did. Actually, this was not a big one. You could put much bigger blowers on here, but we ran a 671, and this thing worked out fairly well. This was a 540-inch crate motor from the guys at Blueprint Engines, and it was a power adder crate motor, so meaning it had low compression. It had their as-cast aluminum big block cylinder heads. It had the same camshaft that we ran on the 496 with the nitrous. It was a BR 300-14 comp cam, and again, I'll put the specs back up here, but it's basically a blower cam, which we were running a blower with. It's also a nitrous cam. It's also a turbo cam. It's also a good NA cam because camshafts are just camshafts. Now, we ran this thing with a YN Team G single plane intake manifold and a Holley carburetor. We ran a 950 XP, so this was a 4150 style intake manifold. We ran the long tube headers that we always run in an MSD distributor. We ran the thing NA before we installed the YN supercharger. And so run in this manner, and you can see some of the notes here that we played a lot with different oil levels, because it's very important on the big blocks that they have windage issues if the oil level is too high. And almost always that we find the pan rating, the oil level pan rating for the oil pan is always too much. So if you have something that says it's supposed to be a 9 or 10 quart pan, if you put that much oil in it, you will definitely get windage in your big block. And we usually have to take oil away for these things to make them work right. But run in this manner, our 540-inch motor made 649 horsepower and 629 foot-pounds of torque. Remember, this thing was low compression. This was, I think it was 9-to-1 or less here. But here's what happened when we put our 671, and I know that the description here is going to say 871. That's because I originally thought it was an 871. It was actually a 671. And we ran this 671 with two, I think that they were 750. Yeah, it was a blower shop, but it was a 671. And we had a 50 blower crank pulley and a 50 blower pulley and 50 crank pulley. So it was driven, and it was two 750 blower carburetors from Holley on this thing. So we ran this at about 4.5 pounds of boost. The peak power jumped up to over 790 horsepower. Peak torque was up to 717 foot-pounds, but we were just getting started because we weren't even really spinning the blower very fast. So here's what happened when we sped the blower up. We sped it up to about almost 8 pounds, 7.8, and you can see we're up, power's up quite a bit, over 880 horsepower now, and torque is up to 804 foot-pounds. And then we stepped things up again and ran a little over 11 pounds on this thing, where this thing made 938 horsepower. Peak torque was up to 866 foot-pounds. And you can see this is the typical kind of railroad track thing, or NA power output. The thing that's important is we went from the single plane intake to the short runner blower manifold. It changes the shape of the curve a little bit. But you can see once we just got into where we were changing the boost, it just railroad tracks, just more boost, it's just more power everywhere, and that's exactly what we saw here. I don't know how much this 671, it was a stripped blower from the blower shop, I don't know how much it would support. I think we could probably make over 1,000 horsepower with this on this combination if we spun the thing up. I'd like to see, intercooling on it. And the one thing that we didn't run, we ran this on race gas, is if we ran this thing at E85, it definitely would have made a bit more power, even at this boost level, and we could have spun this thing, even faster. But here's what happens when you combine a big block with boost from a big roots blower. The final power adder, or should I say power adders, tested on our big block Chevy was a pair of low buck GT45 turbos. You know, the eBay specials, we got these from DNA. They're available from a lot of different sources, but twin GT45s, because in another video you can take a look, that's up right now, I actually ran a single GT45 and it turned out to be nowhere near enough turbo for any kind of big block application. The response rate, very good, but the back pressure was also very high. But running two of them means that instead of making, you know, 700 horsepower, obviously we have enough turbo because we have two of them to make way more than that 1400 horsepower. We didn't turn it up that high in this particular combination, but this motor was a Gen 6 454 from the wrecking yard. We had upgraded it though because we were actually getting it prepped as a big bang deal. So it was a Gen 6 with a cam, and the cam we had in it was a custom. It was 561 lift, a 233, 239 degree duration, and 118 degree LSA. What we were trying to do is stretch power production out farther, higher in the RPM. Turned out to be not that effective. I'm going to do a whole video on why I haven't run the big block big bang, but that's another video. This one also had a set of ported Dart oval port heads, 275s, aluminum heads, and Edelbrock Victor Jr. 454R EFI intake manifold so we could run it fuel injected, and 1000 CFM throttle body. We had 80-pound injectors in it. We ran it all with a Holley HP management system. So run naturally aspirated. This thing made a bit over 500 horsepower, 510, and peak torque checked in at 497 foot-pounds. And here's what happened when we added our twin turbo setup. We had Jason over at JT Fab hooked me up on a set of basically tubular forward-facing manifolds, or tubular headers, more apt, to run our twin turbo stuff on. And then we ran, as I said, a pair of GT45 turbos running through an air-to-water intercooler. Here's what happened when we ran basically 8.8 pounds. You can see, you see how nice and flat, especially now on this scale, you see how nice and flat the torque curve was before 52.52 with the NA combination. We saw the same kind of thing with boost, and we'll see that again as we raise the boost. But run at 8.8 pounds. This thing made over 780 horsepower and over 780 foot-pounds. We'll go ahead and put the peaks up here. But here's what happened. We ran it up in successive stages. We ran more and more boost. I'll show you what happened when we ran it up to almost doubling the boost, 16.5 pounds. See, again, exactly the same shape curve. Big flat torque plateau. And then with peak powers, a good bit over 1,000 horsepower, over 1,040, and peak torque checked in at 1,028. So this combination worked fairly well, easily 4-digit stuff. And there was more power left in these GT45 turbos, as I said. Because now we're running two of them, we don't have to worry about the back pressure. These things will support 1,400 or more horsepower on a big block if we had enough motor. We have enough turbo. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay guys, I think it's pretty safe to say that combining lots of displacement with a big block with a power adder is kind of a match made in performance heaven. Starting things off, we applied Nitrous to our Junkyard motor, and you get your typical kind of like over 500 horsepower, which is a good combination in a nice light chassis. Lots of tire spinning, good ETs. You can go out and run that basically everywhere. And the cool thing is we showed you that Nitrous does what Nitrous does regardless of the combination. Yes, it works very well on a Junkyard motor, but it also worked very well on a modified motor. In fact, we can go beyond that. You don't have to just apply it to a big block. You can apply the same amount of Nitrous to a small block or a Ford or a Hemi or an inline 6-cylinder. It really doesn't matter. Nitrous always works. So our next test, we showed that a 671 blower, in addition to looking very cool, sticking out of the hood with two carburetors, also makes really good power, especially when you apply that 671 on top of a 540-inch stroker big block like the one we did from Blueprint Engines. The next thing, twin turbos. Even cheap eBay turbos can make massive power. We went well into the 4 digits with plenty of power left from two very small, very inexpensive turbos. I'm Richard Holder. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I'll keep testing.